Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep, co-founder and editor-in-chief at From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to our webinar today, which is titled Becoming an HR Strategic Partner in Your Global Business Annual Planning. Now, before we get started, for today's attendees, that's you, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for one of our monthly virtual conferences coming up on September 18th. We'll be exploring the topic of building a corporate culture that's healthy, inclusive, and durable. And here's what that one's about. Company culture is amorphous, yet vital. The shared beliefs, values, and behaviors that drive the actions of individuals and the organizations as a whole. We'll be exploring questions like, what are some of the essential values of successful companies, from collaboration to integrity to well-being? How can workers be included as architects of a company's culture? And how should it be designed and constructed? How should the culture be communicated broadly and in everyday actions? Join us to find out. I'm putting a link in the chat right now to access complimentary VIP tickets to that conference, including access to the whole day's activities. The regular price for our virtual conference tickets is $149, so don't miss out on this opportunity, and I hope we'll see you there. Now, today we'll be talking about becoming an HR strategic partner in your global business annual planning. Workforce planning is most effective when teams align with their company's overall business objectives. Yet, in reality, 75% of teams struggle to accurately forecast their hiring needs because they fail to get in sync with the company's overall direction. Today, we'll explore how to elevate your role as an HR leader in the annual planning process on a global scale. Our expert speakers will show you how to connect with business goals and foster cross-regional collaboration, as well as discover techniques to position yourself as an indispensable partner in driving organizational success with your C-suite executives. Now, today's webinar is presented with support from Hibob. I'll tell you a bit about them. Hibob's modern HR platform, Bob, enables mid-sized businesses to create remarkable work experiences. As the world of work continues to evolve, Bob adapts to business needs using unparalleled configurability that can handle everything from remote and hybrid work to global expansions and non-traditional organizational structures. Now, before we get started, just a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on demand after the event. So watch out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. We'll also have a written account of the conversation on our website at fromday1.co. Now, about 45 minutes into the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session with you, the audience. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, with all that said, let's meet today's speakers. Moderating this discussion will be Emily McCrary Ruiz Esparza, From Day One contributing editor and a freelance journalist who covers the future of work, HR, recruiting, DEI, and women's experiences in the workplace. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, Fast Company, Quartz, and the BBC, among others. Thank you all for being here, and let's get started. Emily, please take it away.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome to our three panelists, and welcome to everybody who's watching today. So glad that you could join us. Before I start asking our panelists a bunch of questions, let's begin with some introductions. So let's go around the room. Please introduce yourself, what you do, where you work, and that'll get us started today. So let's start with John at Willery. Welcome.
Hey, Emily, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. My name is John Bernadovich. I am the founder of Willery and the author of HR Like a Boss. Super on this forum and platform, and appreciate the chance to talk with all of you about the future of work and annual, the goods and bads about it.
Thanks, John. Lane.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lane McFarland. I lead Flashpoint's overall talent strategy as the Senior Director of Talent Management. Flashpoint's a global data and threat intelligence company, but my team focuses on making sure that we have the right talent in the right roles, continuously developing those skills, and ensuring everybody's set up for success. So I'm excited to be here also.
Happy to have you. I'm going to throw up a quick poll that our sponsor today would like everyone to take a look at. If everyone in the audience could give us an answer, that would be great. We'll keep moving right along. Sophia from Hibob, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hey, Emily, I couldn't find my unmute button. Thank you for having me today. As Emily said, my name is Sophia Moll. I'm the current head of global talent management at Hibob. And similar to what Lane was saying, we really are trying to have the right talent in the right place at the right time. And prior to Hibob, I've been supporting organizations scale effectively and build their talent programs for the past 10 years globally. So that's a little bit about me.
Welcome. Before I start asking questions, I wanted to point out two data points that came out in a recent report conducted by everybody's favorite HR expert, the Josh Bersin Company and AMA. And they found that only 32% of talent acquisition leaders feel that they act as strategic partners to their organization. It's a really, really low number, especially considering that HR has now really been cemented in the C-suite as a strategic business function. Seems like talent acquisition might be being left behind. So I'm so glad our panelists are here to discuss this today. It's very, very timely. So let's start talking about the obstacles that get in the way of really good planning. John, let's start with you. What are the typical pitfalls, obstacles, challenges to accurate workforce planning? And can you think of any illustrative or very public examples, that are recent, of companies making mistakes in terms of understaffing, overstaffing, or hiring for the wrong skill set?
Yeah, sure, Emily. Thank you so much. I think first and foremost, the primary driver behind effective annual planning is to ensure that you have the right people leading your organization. If for whatever reason you don't feel like your company is effective in annual planning, look no further than your CEO or your board or other key executives that are responsible for driving that critical business function. That would be my first point. Secondarily, I think it's critical for those leaders to have a vision for where they want to take the business and make that abundantly clear to people on how we're going to get there and what that process will entail and what you as an individual employee what your part will be in that. In addition to having that vision being clear, making sure that you have strategic thinkers within your organization that's providing some unique challenges, I think, and making sure that they're looking at the business as a contrarian in some regards, which I think can be helpful. And then also that execution side. How are we going to get certain things done when certain things are coming their way? So I just want to make sure that we're clear about that. And then the last piece of it, and maybe some of you will love this or maybe not, for those of you in HR, it's all about sales and marketing. If you're not driving top line revenue, you don't have an appropriate strategy around how that is going to happen, how your people within those departments are going to reach their goals. Typically, changes that happen they come as a result of a lack of top line growth, or in some cases, misexecution. And so there's been some recent examples. I know Tesla, Amazon, two companies we either love to love or love to hate, have recently mentioned and had public rifts and reductions in force. I think that's inevitably a part of corporate America, which is part of that type of organization and type that I really don't like, unfortunately, that they look at rifts as being a way to reduce headcount and drive bottom line results, but they don't realize the impact that has on people. As an owner of a staffing firm, I've talked to hundreds of people that got that gut punch of an unexpected reduction in force. And I think it's in the CEO's responsibility to create clarity on what's coming, and even if it's good or bad news. And that goes back to my earlier point. If you're not having effective annual planning, you have obstacles or issues, then please make sure to look directly at your CEO and encourage him, her, or they on how to do that more effectively. And I am getting feedback that my mic's bad, so I'll try to troubleshoot that in the midst of my next question. Thank you, Emily.
You're welcome. Yes, I think the day one team is going to maybe help you with your audio, which is really staticky on my end. It seems like that has been an issue, but if you'll go on mute while you just get that worked out, that would be great. There is a solution to this. Thanks, John. All right. Well, of course, human capital has always been a really important asset to any business. You can't operate one without it. So why is it important that HR take a more active role in annual planning now? Needing to plan for workforce size and headcount is not a new phenomenon. So what's different today that requires HR to insist on their place in workforce planning decisions? Sophia, would you take this one?
Sure. Thank you, Emily. Well, I think that Steve was saying it all when he started by saying that 75% of teams are struggling to accurately forecast their hiring needs, right? That's very indicative of the times that we are in right now. And the way I see it, for me, they're kind of workforce planning has always been important. I think that in the times that we're living today is just essential. And there are three main elements that I see that are happening today that make this even more relevant. The first one is a bucket that I called the effects from the pandemic, which are, the disruptions that created, both in the changes in the market, right? From the pandemic started, we were in the Great Resignation, and now last year we were having massive layoffs in the tech sector. And so that rapid market changes really makes us be a lot more careful and need our planning to be even more accurate. And the second one that's also kind of a consequence from the pandemic is that many companies are still figuring out what is even our work model. And that completely changes the talent pool that we can tap into, right? If we're a fully remote company versus a 5 days a week in the office company, that's going to change what talent pool can we tap into. And even at Hibob today, we're even reconsidering that in the Americas. We have our New York office, but we also have some regional remote employees, and we're struggling with, not struggling, but we're like questioning ourselves, what is the right way to move forward at this point. So that's kind of like bucket number one. The second one is, I think that it's also related to the pandemic, but I think it's like a larger trend, which is the change in employee expectations, not only in benefits and compensation packages and what they want, but also in opening up for non-traditional career paths, people upskilling in their own time and with their own resources to try to tap into different industries and roles. So then talent pools that are constantly evolving in a way that we were not expecting before, people being more open to taking career breaks, people not wanting to retire early, like all those changes in what employees want. And the third one are the larger disruptions like artificial intelligence. And we've talked about that in the past, I think, few years or months, like all the time in every conversation. But I think AI is just one element that symbolizes that big disruption. But there has been a trend in skill sets changing for jobs for the past at least 10 years. So from, I think it was 2013 until 2023, LinkedIn released a research saying that roles, the skills needed for a particular role had changed 25%. And it's expected that by 2027, those skills will change by 50%. So even if you're not hiring for any new roles and you're imagining that scenario that you're still hiring for the same roles that you've already had and you've always hired, those roles and the skills needed for those roles are going to be different. So that creates a whole other level of uncertainty and complexity into workforce planning.
Welcome back, John. I'll get right to you, Lane. Can I get a test 1, 2 from John really quick?
1, 2, 3 test. How's
Sounds
that?
perfect. That's great. Thank you so much for getting that sorted out. Appreciate it. Lane, what would you add?
I would just actually add on to the fact that the partnership. So like our thumb is on the pulse of the organization. As HR, we're involved in everything from start to finish. And a lot of times, and I'm not sure, Sophie, have you seen it? Like business leaders outside of HR rely on their leaders to inform the market, what they're seeing, salaries, shifts across the industry. But they have a day job, and that's what their expertise is. HR have tools for marketing data. We know about layoffs, emerging markets, the difficulties of each. And even to your point, like just because somebody had a career in client success or customer success doesn't mean they would not be able to excel in engineering. So we are seeing all those little nuances and those career shifts and how the market is impacting those. And we're always reading and researching and analyzing and talking to team members and potential candidates. So we might not precisely know like skills gaps, but we know how to uncover them. We know how they are facing issues. We know the issues that they are facing collectively as a team or an org. And really, it's just a partnership and combine all that information.
Thane, you mentioned, and Sophia mentioned it too, folks moving roles and being more open to those switches. I was exchanging emails this week with a contact of mine at the Richmond region partnership that brings economic development to the Richmond, Virginia region, which is where I'm based. And she told me how much more of a role the talent intelligence function within an organization when these companies are meeting with them to think about putting a new plant here or a new factory. We have Lego coming, here in the next few years. The talent intelligence person is in those meetings, the first time. And so that has become such an important and even influential role in major business decisions. Well, what questions should HR leaders be asking to suss out the business needs as it relates to workforce planning? And is this different for really large distributed global companies? Lane, let's hear from you again on this one, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, so I would say all of us, no matter the industry or the country we're in the people business. So business goals are led by and achieved by people. So I would say first starting would be, we need to know both the short-term and long-term goals. Can we reach those with the team members that we currently have? How will we need to evolve to support and achieve these goals? So if you're looking at this from like the HR mentality, you kind of have to look at this cross-functionally. So if there is a shift in our market or how we market our product, how will that impact business operations or sales or even our customer support? Will that business need change or shift throughout the year? Like, what are the near-term needs? When will that need be next? And are there stages throughout that we're going to have those needs? So if there are critical business wins, we need to know, like, does that determine the goal or the need? If the goal is to reach a certain revenue goal, do we have to hit that milestone for these roles to be approved or for this hiring need to actually action? What will the impact be on the roadmap if we hire it earlier versus later? Now, it's often overlooked because the shift to HR partnership and strategic partnership has been changing and growing, which is fantastic. They done a gap analysis? Do they know what skills are currently in the team? What do we need in the future? And the other question is, can we develop those skills in our teams? Do we need to look outside? So in that analysis, if you also consider that goal, what changes will our current team experience? Will we be replacing roles because people are outgrown? Because that happens and that's okay. Will some roles become obsolete? So what about that near-term impact? What about those short-term needs, how we're filling them, the long-term strategy, and how headcount will impact all of those along the way, regardless whether that's on the sales side and the revenue, or if that's on the marketing or the engineering side. And the other one I like to layer in is succession planning. So are the right people developing to step into those roles? And will any changes to the workforce actually change that or create some risk? So if you were to add too many team members to one manager before another manager is developed into that role, what's the risk? What happens when the manager with 10 direct reports leaves? What happens when the person that was set up to move into a people manager role but doesn't gets bored and it doesn't happen? Now, how that relates globally, I think all of those questions are still necessary, but companies often look at the effects on their budget. So if you are US based and you're looking at ways to better control your salary spend, you're often looking at areas with a lower market rate for those. And it's a good consideration to have, but what about our ability to support that region? Will there be a time difference that affects people management of those people? What about your role as a support agent in HR? Will that time difference affect your ability to support them for their needs, for their questions? And then there's also, of course, the regulatory requirements. And each country is wildly different. And then it goes to the question is, do our strategies change based on what region we work inside? So the other question that I get from the talent acquisition team that works with me is the total addressable market. So any TA people on here, you know the TAM. So the range for that, based on the region, some regions are overflowing with machine learning engineers and others have zero. But some regions will pay a premium for a business intelligence analyst, while others are saturated with talent and they just pay lower in that band range. So, I mean, if I was to bring it all back, I would say essentially you should be really asking all the questions all the time, but prioritizing ones that are specific to the situation. So around business goals, skills, impact to your current workforce, and business capabilities.
John?
Yeah, Lane, I'll add one key point to that. I think that maybe could get lost is the cultural fit for your employees. Are they fitting within of your business, and would we emphatically rehire them again? I think that's a critical aspect when you look at force planning and analysis. From my standpoint, I think it's overlooked, and it's an easy exercise to go through, at least the simplicity of the AB. The discussions can be hard because you're talking about people and people that made decisions to hire them.
John, let's stick with you for a moment. Just like, the need for strategic planning is not new. The HR function has been more involved in business decisions for the last 5 years. It's relatively new, but it's becoming more a part of operations and the way things are done. But that doesn't mean that every company really values HR as a strategic contributor yet, or involve them in key business meetings. So in those cases, how do you recommend that HR earn their, quote, seat at the table?
Well, Emily, I know you did not invent that phrase, but I hate it. I hate it for HR professionals when that does come up, just because it's generally insulting from my perspective that a CEO would not see value in the HR function. Now, let's just say that exists within your current environment. How do you go about changing that? And I think that's where this question comes from. And it goes back to what I mentioned before in the annual planning, although my microphone and Zoom connection may not have been as great as I would like it to. All annual planning starts with your CEO and board. And if you see any sort of, I'll call it any sort of inability to do that effectively and a lack of structure, look no further than your CEO and educate that individual on ways that annual planning can drive effectiveness for long-term strategy. CEO relationship is the primary aspect to me that's missing when a HR professional uses that fateful phrase is "I don't have a seat at the table," which in essence means it's not necessarily the HR individual that's in the role today. It's probably been the predecessors or a perception or reality that CEOs have experienced with prior HR leadership that has relegated them to party planning or compliance police and not necessarily a strategic business partner. As it relates to that, if you want to change that, the simplest way for me to suggest it to an HR leader is about relationship building and building back trust to that CEO. If you do not have a seat at the table or your HR function does not, look very closely at the relationship between your CEO and your head of HR and determine how galvanized together that is versus not. If you think about key critical business issues that exist within a company, I have the simple data point that 9 out of 10 times it relates to a person. If you have a challenge in your sales organization, it's likely to do with a person. If you have challenges around your operations or even in talent acquisition or in human resources, it has to do with a person. And the only way that we can get that proverbial seat at the table is to build back and establish that relationship, in some cases that never existed, with your CEO. Once you're there, you need to add value and be an effective business leader, which to me is 3 simple things that you need to do. Number 1, you need to have a way to find and ensure your employees are engaged in the work that they're doing. It's clear what they're supposed to do every single day, and they have meaning in what they do. They'll probably be more satisfied and happy doing their job. Secondarily, we have to drive results for our business. To me, one of the lacking things that I've experienced in writing my book and talking with thousands of HR professionals is HR professionals don't love finance or accounting or numbers. But too bad, HR business leader that wants a seat at the table, if you don't understand a profit and loss statement and you don't understand where HR fits into that, which is from top to bottom. And the challenge that I see oftentimes with companies is that they're looking at the bottom of the P&L first and not realizing that profit is an outcome of a number of unique things that are going to happen and run effectively in a strategic manner. And I think that that's another critical part for HR professionals. Become a HR business nerd and understand P&L and all that goes with it. That might be my next book I write. Business finance for HR, or a class I could teach in some college if they'd ever have me. The last point that I'll make goes back to the earlier suggestion around vision. And ultimately, if you want to make an impression on your CEO, find out from them what they care about, where their heart is, what makes them get up in the morning and go do their job. And more likely than, I hope, more likely than anything, it'll be more than making money. It'll be making a difference in the community. It'll be eradicating homelessness in our area, whatever it might be. And maybe they love to golf and they want to use golf as a platform to change the world. Find out what tugs your CEO's heart and give them a platform to use their business, the profitability, and their employees as a way to attack those societal issues. And that, in quick summation, is how hopefully you can view and develop a better relationship with your CEO. And then once you get that proverbial seat at the table, how to make sure that you keep it and you make a difference in the business.
Sophia, I noticed that when John brought up P&Ls and not being particularly good at numbers, you laughed a little bit. Is that because you relate to that, or were you thinking of something in particular?
No, because I had to learn, right? I think that HR is all about data, and you have to bring data into the table, and you have to understand the business, and you have to speak the business language. And usually they don't train you to look at that. Many HR leaders don't come from an HR background. That's me also included. And so sometimes you come from a psychology background, or you come from a communications background, or you come from something else, an anthropology background. Like, there's so many ways that you end up in HR, and then you learn as you go. And that is usually a skill set that we usually lack, and we have to learn.
Well, Sophia, I'm going to stick with you for a moment. Now that we're talking about relationship building and learning what matters to business leaders in the executive team, can you recommend some small steps that HR can take to build a strategic partnership, form those relationships, adding on to what John said, and really be a thought partner in the business?
Yeah, I think that everything is closely related to what John says. And I focus it more in what happens if you don't have access to your CEO, which sometimes happens, or you have very limited access to your CEO, depending on how big your company is or how bureaucratic it is, in that sense, how hierarchical it is. And I think that going back to that piece of building relationships, you can start, if you're an HR business partner or if you're a talent partner, you can start with whoever is your closest business leader. Is it is it a sales director? Is it I don't know, the head of content marketing? Is it like, who is the closest business leader that you have already built a relationship, or you're building a relationship with? And I would say, for the ones, and so strengthen that relationship with the ones that you already have, and start bringing this conversation so they are also educated about why they want to bring you into the conversations that they have. And then I would suggest, with the leaders that maybe are a little bit further from you, start having check-ins. Don't make it an annual workforce planning thing. Just get into their calendar for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, every other week, every month, depending what's the culture in your company, and just find that time to talk about, and this is similar to what John was saying, to talk about what they care about, what is important to their business. Start learning about their business. Like, what are the metrics that they are looking at? What are the pain points that they're experiencing with their people? Like, just sit and listen and ask questions and learn as much as you can, because that is going to also open up the opportunity for you to be able to start start sharing your insights, and start sharing your expertise in small doses, because you need to get that buy-in, and they have to first see you as a partner that they can trust. And that takes time, and that means building relationship a little bit at a time, and that means maybe not participating in workforce planning this year, but you're building to be part of it the next one, right? And I would say then you have to be ready for when you get a slot, whatever that is. They bring you for a conversation that maybe is not workforce planning, is we struggle, like we are, I don't know, we don't know if we need to fire this person, or we're struggling with X employee, and they bring you to share that. Come ready, come with, have the data, have the information about the business, know the language. You have prepared for that moment. So when you actually get not the full seat at the table, but a tiny seat at the table or at a smaller table, you can show your expertise. And then have clarity. And John was also saying that, and I was briefly mentioning this when I was saying HR leaders sometimes have to learn this, but like know what's your average time to hire, the geographical inputs, the cost of recruiting versus building people versus borrowing people, know what's your success rate after onboarding, know your turnover rates, know the time that it takes to ramp up someone, a new salesperson. Like have all those data points ready to go, because that's also how you're going to be able to justify, I don't want to say justify, but you're going to be able to showcase the reasoning behind the inputs that you're giving. And then somebody I think was asking the Q&A about like reporting, and I think that regular reporting, even if you were not part of the strategic conversation of workforce planning, eventually if you're in an HR team or you're related to hiring, you're going to get that plan. Even if you were not part of it, you're going to see it. So it's important that then with the decisions that were made, you're able to track what is the impact with these decisions and how the decisions may correlate to what's happening a year from now, and track that information. And I would even suggest like send short reports to leaders about like what's the state of our workforce, or get some time again in their calendar with the excuse of being like, hey, let's do like a quarterly checkup on how things going. You know, start finding those opportunities. And then if you can, if you have the agency, I would also suggest start creating those cross collaboration groups for other things potentially. So for example, there's a lot of like groups related to kind of like revisioning why an employee left, or if we're having a high attrition, like why is that happening? Create a, don't make those decisions by yourself, or don't just give your input. Have the opportunity to create like a working group. So you bring different leaders to really be thought. So start developing that muscle of thought partnering in smaller things that may not be workforce planning. I think those are some of the things that you can do in a, again, John was talking way more macro. If you have more authority, if you have more leadership in the company, you can tap into that. But if you don't, there are also small steps that you can take to build to that.
Lane, what would you add? What kind of relationship should HR be forming with other departments? I think, Sophia, you make such a good point that you need to know a lot of things in every department. There's just a lot of information gathering that needs to be done. Lane, what would you add to that?
So I actually would take it another layer down than Sophia just did. So we are the sum of our teams. So I think that all teams within the HR group, wherever you fall, need to develop that trust and create an understanding and meeting those teams where they are. And the reason I say it specifically like that is some teams need that hard data, the ADO, the ATTF, the ATF. They need that data to understand where you're coming from. Maybe the finance team just needs to hear the cost savings initiatives, the vacancy savings during hiring period. Maybe the CEO just needs to know how many headcount you've actually fulfilled by department. So that may be what they need to see. Other teams need somebody to partner with. So even if your team is split up between like a people experience side and a talent acquisition specialists can definitely be the ear for another team member, even if they just need an ear to vent through or help them through a difficulty or bounce an idea off of. It doesn't have to be only in the form of our role, but the trust that the teams form will then develop the trust that you're forming with those team members' leaders, and then it just keeps scaling from there. So you have that group to tap onto and see where that success aligns and builds with.
I think it's worth pointing out that just because talent acquisition belongs in business meetings, that you're going to have an executive team or even business leaders that want you there. Realistically, that's going to happen. Folks might feel territorial about the decisions they make. Those relationships may not be there yet because it takes time. And so they may not trust you yet. They may not understand why you're there and what value you're about to bring unless you've been doing this for a while. Sophia, we'll start with you, and then I'd like to hear from John as well.
I was
How do
just
you?
going to add from one,
Oh,
I was just wanted to double click that what Lane was saying about internal alignment in HR teams is sometimes not there. So first, I love that point of like looking inwards into your team and making sure that you're all aligned and you all know what's going on and you all have like a plan on how you're going to tackle this or approach this before even you go and look for the other partners, because it's very true that sometimes we are also working in silos.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'll add into that, Emily. Thank you so much. And I think you asked earlier, like where should you be establishing those relationships? Well, everywhere is not really a fair answer to that question. Unfortunately, that's part of the reality of human resources. That's why I think the job is so difficult, is that you can impact so many different people in so many different ways, and you can only do so many things at a time. To be very clear, I'll go back and I apologize. Maybe you won't like this. Maybe you'll like this better than the scratchy microphone I had at the beginning. My apologies to everyone for that. But I think you should start with your finance friends in developing a relationship with whatever level you're at. So if you're the head of HR, then CFO. If you're a manager, and so on. And just get to know them as individuals, what makes them tick, why they're working at the company, what they do outside of work, like regular relationship building skills, which I think are sometimes you don't want to do that inside of an organization because you're afraid of what happens if something changes. But I recommend that to you because I've had a lot of reflection in my career, and I've spoken with a lot of people over the course of their careers. And what do people say all the time when they leave or retire from working? I don't necessarily miss the work, but I miss the people. And I think all too often we lose sight in building relationships. You don't have a seat at the table, it's because you haven't built a relationship with the CEO, or prior individuals have not, in my opinion. And so I would suggest building that relationship, getting to know them, understanding what makes them tick, and then diving into the things that you need to understand that's important to finance or in other important functions within your organization. So Sophia mentioned the fact that it took her a while, or she had to adjust to that, like learning that skill of reading financial statements. I just think it's a missing gap within human resource professionals. And when I talk to non-HR executives and leaders, what do they tell me about HR pros? Is that they're not driving results for the business. And more often than not, those results are bottom line related results. Let's not hate the player. Let's hate the game, not the player, so to speak, when it comes to that. And so I would start with your finance friends, because HR and finance, payroll, they should all be interconnected with each other. And then once you figure out how to create a relationship with an accountant, who we all know the stereotype for accountants, that's not necessarily true, because I lived with one for a long time with my dad, and he had a gregarious, outgoing personality and hated numbers, ironically, as an accountant, which was kind of strange. But get to know them individually and then grow that from there. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential for you to make a friend, enjoy your time at work more, and get better at it in the process.
I want to remind our audience that here in about 10 minutes or so, we'll be taking questions from you all for our panelists. So if you have a question you'd like for anyone on the panel or the panel in general, please put it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. All right, so why, Sophia, I'm gonna come to you with this question. Why do you believe that so many companies fail to accurately forecast their hiring needs? Is it because talent acquisition and HR is just not involved enough, or is there something else that's getting in the way?
I think that definitely plays a part, and also the volatile and complex environment that we live in also plays a part into that. I don't want to minimize those two things. There are also things that we could do better for more accurate forecasting our hiring needs. I think that one related to the volatile of the market is that many times companies, especially when you are a startup or a scale up, that you many times don't have the full picture. You don't have all of the data, right? You're still building your systems, you're still collecting data. It's a work in progress. You tend to focus on historical data and data only from your company. So you look at like what happened in the past few years, and you look only at the company that you're at, and you fail to see half of the story, which is what's happening to other companies in the industry, what's happening to companies similar to you, and what's going to happen, or what are the trends towards the future. Right? It's like, oh, last quarter or last year, this is how it went. We did really well. Let's just copy and paste that, or let's just do something similar to that. And even if you don't have the full set of data that you would like to, try to find those data points that will allow you to look into the future, to look into trends, to really look at case studies from other companies that are right now going through it. You know, it's not that you have to have the perfect research report. The second thing is, I think there is, especially as in startups / scale ups, the technology integration. Sometimes we do have some of the data, but we have it all over the place. It's in million different Excels. It's just in different departments that don't talk to each other, or they're not really talking to each other on a daily or a weekly basis. It's either because sometimes we don't even have the budget. If you're in the nonprofit space, you sometimes don't even have the budget to get the right tool that would integrate all of your data. And it takes a lot of time and thought to bring all those things together. So I would say that's another reason why we can be failing into accurately forecasting. I think the other thing is that related to the lack of alignment with HR is that it depends on the complexity of the company that you're at, right? So the higher the volume, the more complicated the search, the more complex the roles, the more geographical locations that you're in, that all adds layers of complexity that are harder and harder to get right in planning, right? There's so many variables that are in place that maybe sometimes we don't take into account. The different like I think, I don't remember, I think John was saying like the cultural aspect of this. How is hiring in one context versus another, right? And I would say the other thing is that, and this is related to what Lane was saying, I'm trying to connect all the dots. It was like sometimes when we look at hiring needs, we only look at hiring and we stop there. And we're not looking at all the other dimensions of talent that need to play a part into workforce planning in order for that accurate forecasting. So Lane was mentioning a lot of this, like succession planning. Are you aligned with the succession plans that the business has? Do you know how many leaders you need to replace or that you don't have a bench for? Do you have accurate talent review process where you can actually see how many people or what percentage of people do you have and in what roles you have ready for a promotion versus those that are likely to be managed out of the company because they're not performing? Are you what are the leadership the learning development plans that you have in place? Do you have clear career pathings, or do you have transition programs for people to move into one direction or another? Are there people going through them at this moment that are gonna be able to cover for those needs? And so you cannot just think about hiring as talent acquisition on its own. That will definitely not, you're gonna either you're gonna be understaffed or overstaffed, you're gonna hire for the wrong skills, like you're really not gonna be looking at your whole company. And I would say last point is that I feel like workforce planning is a tool, not a result. So it's not about having the perfect plan. That doesn't exist. I don't think there's a perfect plan. It's about building the processes and the relationships and having the right people that are communicating constantly in order to be agile. And so that you build a plan that is a guide, is a guidance towards your going, and you have as much clarity as you can have. But then because you have the systems in place, you're quick to pivot when things change and things are always going to change. So that's the last thing, is like, think about it more as a tool than as an end goal.
One more question before we get to our Q&A. I'm going to send this to John, and then I'd like to hear from Lane as well. How do you set realistic expectations for how a workforce can effectively and efficiently scale? I think that's something, in talking to other TA professionals, and especially if they're not used to working with finance or used to working with business leaders so closely, giving them a sense of, we can't hire 30 people in 45 days using 2 recruiters. It's just not going to that's not going to go well. John, let's hear from you first.
Sorry if I'm beating the same drum, but it's really financially driven. Those decisions need to be financially driven. So as capable and skilled and knowledgeable and experienced the business leader you're talking about that's looking to scale has to realize that we can scale at the pace that the business can scale, or through the investments that we're getting, maybe it's private equity or other forms. That'd be the first set of expectations. Let's not get outside of our skis. Let's use this business as if we owned it ourselves. We were using our own money. How would you make those investments? And then the next thing I would talk about, and sorry for the sports comparison, but I love to watch any sort of sports, and especially in professional sports, as an HR leader and someone that studies people. It's amazing how quickly they roll call rosters on an NFL franchise. They grade the players from best running back to third string, and then they'll cut players really quickly. It's a ruthless business if you've read it or seen it. I'm not suggesting that corporate America or small to medium-sized businesses take that same approach, but I am suggesting that you grade your employees. And you grade them on their ability as being a fit, as being productive. And if you're looking to scale the business, are they going to be able to help us scale? Do we have the right people, the right members on our roster in order for us to scale this company? And if you have someone that's expecting you to grow exponentially, but you as a talent acquisition or talent professional realize we don't have the team. We don't have the team to take us to that next step. That to me is where you get into fact-based evaluation, and doing that on a consistent basis. Look at your rosters consistently, your team members, and make sure that they fit into the criteria that you measure or want to quantify success for an individual. We at our firm do it from a cultural fit, from a productivity standpoint, and are they a re-emphatic rehire? And those are the two kind of main areas from my standpoint to address that point, Emily.
Lane, what would you add?
So cut me off if we get to the Q&A time period, but I think that the upskilling should be a part of your talent strategy, regardless of your workforce planning. This keeps people engaged. Development is always there for them. And it's always hitting that top 3 of reasons people stay or leave a company. But if we look at it from like a reskilling from a financial perspective, depends on the people of the team. What is their capability? What are their interests? What's being asked of them? What will it mean for their current job? And that's why that partnership that we've been talking about this whole time really matters, because you're building trust across the organization. So people are willing to come to you and say, this person cannot, but I have a fear of losing them. And then you start looking at how those changes affect that upskilling or even the reskilling or your workforce planning. If it's short-term strategy is upskill them, and the long-term strategy is to replace them because there's a change in your ICP or you're changing your technology stack. There's always a situation that arises, but there needs to be a continuous strategy on best case scenario, the medium case scenario, and then of course the worst case scenario.
All right, as we start with our Q&A, there's one more poll that we would like for the audience to take a look at. If we could go ahead and put that up. And let's start chipping away at these questions. We have quite a few. We'll go with this first one, which comes from an audience member, Abigail. And they write, in the nonprofit sphere, it's often a finance professional that takes on HR duties. What would you say finance professionals can learn from HR professionals? Any ideas come to mind immediately? Lena, John.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can dig into this. We work with a lot of nonprofit clients, and we hear that a lot. And I'd say from a HR, from a finance perspective, if you're responsible for human resources, my suggestion is to get the baseline items of HR that you need to understand when it comes to talent acquisition, talent development, performance, payroll, et cetera. And then you need to hire where you can to your weaknesses, and especially to the places that are a significant risk to the business. When I say that, I don't necessarily just mean compliance related areas. I mean strategy planning or succession planning. We mentioned it previously. As a finance professional, my guess is you haven't had a bunch of experience in doing that. And so where you can, that's why a lot of nonprofits hire outside HR consultants, because they don't end up having enough of that innate skill within the finance team or the person that's doing HR. And it's always scary to me when I hear of that is the case, because I've spoken to a number of finance professionals that will tell me behind closed doors, I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to HR, but I was given the task of doing this. And what do you recommend? And those are the things. Get to the basics, learn them, and then at the same time, hire to your weaknesses, the areas you think are your biggest risk.
Thanks, John. I like this question that comes from an attendee who writes anonymously. I won't read the whole question. I'm going to distill it. They write that they understand, obviously, that understanding P&L statements is imperative, but as an HR professional seeking to gain more strategic skills and wanting to become more relevant, they want to know if you have any recommendations for doing so. They know that they've been accepted to master's degree program for HR and labor relations. Congratulations, by the way. But are there any other ways to learn about the financial side, maybe sort of going back to grad school? Sophia, you mentioned that you had to learn this. How did you do it?
I really wanted to speak, but I was just gonna say, sit down with the finance team and the business leaders. I mean, whoever you have a close relationship to, and ask questions. Just don't be afraid to say that you don't know. I think that that's the first step. At least that's how I did it. And maybe I had great teammates throughout my career, which I did. But and I just sat down and was like, I don't know what this means. Can you help me understand this, or what does it mean when they share X number? And I sometimes still do it when I move into a different role in a different industry. There's new jargon, there are new like data points that I hadn't considered before, and then I'm not an expert in that industry, and I would sit down with someone that knows and ask questions.
Lane?
Yeah, I would actually say very similar is if you're trying to learn it, quantify the qualifiable, because if you live and work inside the HR field, you have a ton of data. Maybe you have a dashboard that you can actually pull that thread and understand what each individual impact is. The more you deal with data that you understand, the more you start understanding the numbers, the more you can actually correlate your understanding of those spreadsheets or of those mass data dumps into those quantifiable metrics that finance looks at. And if you can relate all of that HR data into business metrics, you can start speaking the language a lot easier, and then that uncovers additional learning.
Yeah.
I have one more thing to Lane and Sophia, and this may be a little bit controversial if you're thinking of it, but I would encourage that person and others that are looking to become better business leaders, better understanding of finance, go start a side hustle. Whether it's something you're super passionate about or interested in, maybe it's an Etsy site or something else, and figure out the dynamics of what it takes from top to bottom to run a business. And if you get that perspective, what does it take to sell something? What does it take to market something? What does it take to fulfill something? What does it take to do all the other things outside of HR? If you actually have physical experience in doing that, you'll have a much greater perspective of what those individuals in those departments are dealing with every single day.
You all. Let's take this next question from an attendee who writes, since we're on the topic of data, we'll take this one. What data can HR leaders offer to their strategic partners that would be most helpful in planning? For example, skills assessments, something like that. Lane, would you take this one? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a lot of answers. So my team actually deals 100% in the people data and analytics. And I think I have a different dashboard for every department leader, for the entire executive team, to their senior leaders, the deputy level and below. And I think it is based on what that team cares about. So our finance team, for example, they have their finance data. They understand that where it doesn't correlate because of non-integrated systems, is what does that mean for a timepiece that doesn't have a direct impact on what they're seeing on the finance end. So if there's a gap between the time somebody leaves to the time somebody is hired, there's automatically a vacancy gap. They don't know that because they're not tracking time to hire, they're not tracking time to fill or start dates. So understanding what those teams would like to see and then providing that for them on an automatic basis, that's always a big one for me. Automation is key. But if the finance team likes to see spreadsheets and quantifiable numbers and dollars and cents and time periods, that's what they get. If the product and engineering team needs to see exactly where they are at with their current hiring trends, if they need to see the performance data on the same sheet from their teams, from their sub teams, if they need to see a manager risk ratio based on how many direct reports each one of their team leaders or directors have, and they want to see that right away, you need to meet them where they're at and make it in a digestible way that they can understand. And every type of leader is completely different. So you can find it objectively from a larger lens on what this type of personality or type of function would like to see. And then you can start getting more granular. In that process, you're gaining their trust. You're creating that partnership because you're meeting them where they're at and you're providing the information they want to see and not inundating you and customizing every little dashboard and look and view.
All right, this audience member wants to know, how do you thrive as an HR partner in a very competitive environment where everyone is bombarding line managers for some attention or relationship building? Sophia, would you take this one?
Yes, that's a very real challenge. I was laughing because I was just discussing with a colleague this week something similar to that. I just think that you have to build what's your value, right? Why would that person want to sit down with you, and what's the value that they get also from that conversation? And sometimes that's easier to build, but that's going back to everything that we share, that you have to have your data ready, maybe even like have shared information with them before, where it's a dashboard or a report, or ways in which they already see what value you bring and that the conversation is meaningful. So that's one way of cutting through the noise. I think another way is just this is not very this is not very scientific, but I think that what works is just being genuine and just looking to know the person, like caring about the human being and not only the tactical needs that you have. So not only going to that person when you need something from them, but really, and even, I don't know if you work in a remote environment, that would be different. That would be more difficult. But if you do work in an office or you have the chance to have some face-to-face time, even like, building that relationship during lunchtime or in the hallway, or just like when you see that they are free, just engage for 5 minutes and talk. And I know in a virtual environment, you have to be more intentional because that's not possible in the same way. But even that, like end of the day, 5 minutes. Do you want to like review like the week so far, or do you just want to chat? Just caring about the person, building that relationship. I think that proving your value and caring about the person are the two main ways in which, and of course, when you know that that person has a particular need that it relates to you, and that I think it's important that's why it's important to be in touch with the business, because you hear things, maybe that person did not come to you, but you've heard from a colleague. If you're in touch with the rest of your talent team or your HR team, you heard from a colleague that that team may be struggling with XYZ, and just proactively saying like, hey, I heard about this. I can support in this way. I can take this off from you, is also a way for that person to be like, oh, this person is not bringing me another problem or another challenge, but it's also giving me relief and support. And that's also a good way of cutting through the noise.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. Sophia, John, and Lane, thank you so much for your time, for being here, for sharing what you know and offering some really practical advice. I'm going to give it back to Steve at From Day One.
Indeed. Thank you, Emily, Sophia, Lane, John, for some really excellent advice, real life stories, and practical positive advice. So it was a really well-rounded conversation. Thanks again to Hibob for their support and to all of you who participated today. Before you all sign off, I'm going to drop a link again to some complimentary VIP tickets for our virtual conference. It's coming up on September 18th, and it's about building a corporate culture that's healthy, inclusive, and durable. So on behalf of all my colleagues at From Day One, thanks for participating and stay well. Bye for now.
See you later.